And thank you for joining us. I am Tamara Scott. Thank you for watching, for listening, however the modem is that you're going to be with us today. This is the Tamara Scott Show live. Live is always better than dead, isn't it? But and you and I both know we wish more people would have a little more life to them, and that we could get a little more life in our activity and people watching and being engaged in the process. But to joining me today, we've got a very exciting show for you. Henry Burke is with me today. Henry is a civil engineer. He's gotten into this Common Core. Thankfully, people like him who like numbers are willing to dig in and find out what's really happening. First, before we get kind of conversation with Henry, I'm going to take you to a video. Sir Ryan, do we have that queued up? Or let me get it for our people, and let me just slow down here and say, once again, our hearts go out. Last week, our hearts went out to the folks at the Navy Yard. This time, it is to the believers, the Christian believers in the church in Pakistan, to the mall goers in Kenya. I would ask you to look who's behind both of those assaults, and understand there is an enemy out there, and no peace talks and no compromise is going to satisfy them. And we need to be doing everything we can in this country to protect ourselves from having that happen here again. Do not forget it already happened once, if not multiple occasions on a smaller level. This video we're going to watch is Lieutenant Governor Dan Forest, North Carolina Lieutenant Governor Dan Forest, who's gotten involved and decided he needed more questions. Before the school year was happening, he wanted to know specifics about Common Core as Lieutenant Governor. So he wrote or drafted a letter to what they call their Department of Public Interest. In that letter, he had 67 questions that he thought should have been answered fairly easily from someone in the department. This is the response he got. We're going to cut into this tape. It is on YouTube if you want to watch it. If you want to go to Truth for Our Time, that's the name that this show was under on another station, and we may come back to Truth for Our Time. We're just using that right now as a landing spot as we kind of fit in our space here and figure out what our name is and what we're going to do. And you can have input in that if you want to. You can go onto the Facebook page, Truth for Our Time, and give us some input there as well. And if you want to join in the show today, that phone number, may want to go ahead and write it down, is 855-244-0077. 855-244-0077. Ryan, let's see what Lieutenant Governor Dan Forest was able to get when he made a simple request to his Department of Public Instruction.
At State Board of Education meetings, I drafted a 67-question letter to the Department of Public Instruction. The questions represented a wide range of concerns brought to my office by parents, teachers, school administrators, and concerned North Carolinians. All questions asked were very reasonable and should have been easy to answer with clear, concise responses. On August 2nd, I received the official reply from the Department of Public Instruction. Specifically, I received 12 boxes containing approximately 40,000 sheets of paper. A cover letter was attached that did not directly answer any of my 67 questions, but rather referred me to 134 separate websites that each link to over 100 separate pages, more than 320 separate reports, hundreds of original source documents, over 40 presentations, one blog post, and a thumb drive. When broken down, DPI's reply took 597 pages to answer each single individual question submitted. Yes, 597 pages for each individual answer. This is government bureaucracy at its best. These basic questions from a state board...
40,000 pages, 12 boxes, 597 pages, did he say, for each question? He's right. This is absolute government bureaucracy. And if we go with Common Core, this is exactly what we're dealing with. And the question I guess I have is, why don't they just give us information? If this is such a wonderful program, why is information about it so difficult to come by? So Henry Burke is joining me today. Henry is a civil engineer. Henry, thank you so much for joining us online today.
Well, it's my pleasure, Tamara.
Now, when you see that tape, what goes across your mind?
Well, it's interesting because there is a huge amount of bureaucracy, and actually, Lieutenant Governor Dan Forrest and I have corresponded some. I sent him some information on Common Core implementation costs. I also responded to his initiative in that state, and it was a brief but a nice little exchange that we had.
And for people who are listening, no matter where you're at, what state you're in across the country, I can tell you there are Stop Common Core groups for almost every state, if not every state. So no matter where you're at, you could go to Facebook and do a Stop Common Core on your state and see what comes up. If you want information, we'll be glad to pass that along to you. Like I said, you can go to Truth for Our Time and ask questions there. But today, you're welcome to call in with your questions, 855-244-0077. All right, Henry Burke, you have done a state analysis, a state-specific analysis on cost implementation. Because for those of us who have concerns about Common Core, they range everywhere from the data mining, from the lack of standards. We are told it's rigorous standards, but instead it's just regimented standards or restricted standards and what people can no longer teach. Teachers are losing their freedom in what they can have in the classroom and what they can actually use as resources. But the standards are not necessarily better. But we really haven't talked about the cost. Take us through, for those who are listening, the cost of this implementation.
I would be glad to, Tamara, and also to the listeners. When we think about Common Core, you wonder, okay, why did so many states sign up for this crazy thing? 45 states plus the District of Columbia, 46 states have adopted the Common Core standards. And when you actually get into discussions with the states and look at the real facts, you wonder, okay, why did so many jump on this Common Core bandwagon? Well, the answer is really quite simple. It's called money. The states were hurting a few years ago. I'm not making excuses for them by any means. However, Obama and Secretary of Education Arne Duncan orchestrated this very clever little program called Race to the Top, and buried very deeply in the stimulus measure, that $787 billion measure that we love so much. That measure, you might recall, was signed into law less than 2 weeks after Obama was inaugurated on January 20th, 2009. So they got this bill through in the dark of night. Buried deep within that law was some $5 billion, actually $4.25 billion, that was scheduled and designed for this Race to the Top program. What did Race to the Top do? Well, they like to brag about this, both Obama and Duncan, and that is with only $4 billion, and I say only, in jest, they were able to convince these states to jump on the Common Core bandwagon. Well, how'd they do this? Well, they set up a competition. The competition was called Race to the Top. And by the way, like any game, they changed the rules. Well, a game's not supposed to be played this way, but they started this game called Race to the Top. It was a competition. But then they changed the rules after the game had begun. And what they established was that in order for states to gain points in this competition, they had to agree, first of all, to dump their existing state standards and adopt the Common Core standards. And mind you, the Common Core standards were not even written at that time. So you talk about signing a blank check. That's exactly what these states did. So they signed on to the Common Core standards in order to get points for this. On their proposal, they had to agree, and they had to get the teachers' unions and everyone else in the state to buy into this thing. Oh, yeah, we're on board. We love the Common Core. And the more they said they loved it, the more points they got. So 45 states plus D.C., 46 total adopted Common Core, and this was in rapid-fire succession. I mean, in less than a year's time, all of these states had jumped on board. And mind you, the states they were so anxious to get some of this money, they didn't even bother to do a cost analysis.
Right.
And my background is civil engineering and construction. I built lots of construction projects. And I'll tell you what, if we were to even consider bidding a construction project without visiting the site, without making a detailed estimate, we'd be run off. We would not keep our job for 2 minutes. That's all part of the deal. You've got to understand your costs going in. Well, the states didn't do that. They simply signed on, and they said, well, we'll figure out the cost later. Couldn't possibly cost all that much. So what are we talking about here? This race to the top carrot of $4 billion, and actually the states, when you add it all up, these 46 states, they received some $3.94 billion, so just shy of $4 billion. Okay, that's on the award side. That's the carrot side. That's what they hoped to win. And there were, by the way, 2 states, 2 winners, I'll call it, winners in quotes, 2 winning states in phase 1 of the competition. There were 10 states that won in phase 2. Total of 12 states brought home the bacon from this race to the top scheme. Okay, on the cost side then.
And Henry, can I just ask a question right there?
Certainly.
And I'll just let you know as well. We've had Scott Russell join us here in studio. Scott is an Ankeny parent and been active volunteering in Ankeny, which is a larger school district just to the north of the Des Moines area in central Iowa. So he's joining in on the conversation as well. And I want you to keep going. I don't want to ruin your flow here, but I just have this question. Of those states that were awarded the money, can we see, are these poverty-stricken states? Is there anything? I know they had the race to the top and they had that application, but for those of us who are a little more suspicious, was it just another redistribution of wealth, or what was the criteria? Those states that got the money, is there a telltale sign there?
Well, that's a great question, and I cannot even attempt to read the mind of the Department of Education. However, some of these numbers look a little bit suspicious. For example, you can guess which district got the most money per student. Well, let's see. That just might happen to be the District of Columbia. They received $75 million, round numbers, and that cranks out to, they have 70,000 students. That's fairly small as a state goes. For those 70,000 students, you simply divide the two numbers, 75 million divided by 70,000, that comes out to $268 per student. So they got quite a bit of an award. And not to get all involved in the numbers here, Tamara, but that $268 per student.
And is $268 you say, or $260?
Yeah, $268. That's
$268 per student. That's all.
Yeah, that's all. And see, that award, Race to the Top, was spread over a 4-year period. So when you take $268 and you divide that by 4, that's
lunch money.
$67. Now, how much can you do for $67 per student?
If we were homeschooling, that'd be a pretty good amount. But even at 4 years for a homeschooler, that's tough. That's not lunch money, Henry. That's really not even helpful.
Well, that's right. That's right.
It would have cost. DC's not a state, but it would have cost them more to do the paperwork.
That's certainly. Oh, you're exactly right. The paperwork was just overwhelming. Thousands of pages went into each of these state proposals that went into the Department of Education, and various people have made estimates on how many hours it took to prepare. And in most states it was several people for like a year's time. I mean, it was very substantial.
So, Henry, this is Scott Russell. And
yes, how are you, Scott?
Good, I'm doing good. I read your articles recently that Tamara had sent me as well. So it is interesting when you break that down to that small number and you think about what all is going to come in Common Core, which is the assessment change, the technology change. And I know I've tried to get at our Iowa Department of Education to give me an idea of, what is this going to cost? And honestly, I wouldn't expect them to have a totally baked out answer because they're still unpacking it.
Mm-hmm.
But I know just from the assessment in Iowa alone, our assessment today that we use, I believe, is around $6, and the cost is moving to upwards of $20 just for that assessment alone. So if you look at that $67 you were talking about, a big chunk of that they're awarded barely even covers the cost of the assessment, not alone all the overhead, the administration, the implementation, the technology, everything else is going to come with it. So to your point, the reward they received is very, very little compared to the cost that they're going to have to pay.
You're exactly right. You're exactly right, Scott. And let's look at this cost side a little bit. Some people might ask, Henry Burke, who are you to establish costs for implementation of Common Core? Well, like anyone, you've got to go to a reliable source. And so I looked all around the country at different estimates that had been made for Common Core costs. And by far the most complete, the most rigorous, really the most accurate analysis was made by the Pioneer Institute. They produced a report about a year ago which listed all of the states, the 46 states that had adopted. They showed a total cost, aggregate cost for the 46 states of $15.8 billion. Let's call it $16 billion. So again, if we step back and look at the big picture, $4 billion was awarded through Race to the Top. The federal government awarded another $1.26 billion through another 5 competitive programs. The total then of the 3.94 plus the 1.26 is $5.2 billion was what the total amount of all of the awards that were given to the states through Race to the Top and the 5 other programs. Let's call it $5 billion. Well, then, in this Pioneer Institute report, as I mentioned, they established a total cost for the 46 CCS states of roughly $16 billion. Step back, if you will, and look at the cost versus the rewards. Let's see. If something's going to cost you $16 billion total, and you only received $5 billion, answer me, what kind of a deal is that? It's not that great, is it? And yet no one has taken the time to really do a cost benefit analysis. Well, okay, the total cost for those 46 states, $16 billion, but that number doesn't do you much good because it's kind of out there somewhere.
Right.
So what we need to determine was the cost for each and every state. And even though I love the Pioneers' work, they did a great analysis, but for some reason they stopped short of actually determining the final cost for CCS Common Core implementation for each and every state. So I simply took it to the obvious logical conclusion, and then I established a cost for Common Core implementation for each of the 46 states. And I listed that in a couple different reports. One major report, States Taxpayers Cannot Afford Common Core Standards. That's the title of the report. So then I decided to go through, after I sent out that report, and by the way, I don't do anything in a vacuum, in the dark. Every one of my reports, I send it to the Pioneer Institute, and Jamie Gass, for one, from the Pioneer Institute, he does commend me for my work. He thanks me, So even though I don't work for the Pioneer Institute, I call it a teamwork effort, where I simply took their information and just kind of took it to the next level.
Right. And Jamie Gass, for those of you who don't know, he directs the Center of School Reform at Pioneer Institute, which is a Boston-based think tank. As you were talking about Jamie Gass, he was on my email screen right in front of me, I have to confess.
Really? Well, That's great. That's good. And really, he is very appreciative of the work that I do. Okay, so we have these costs for each of these states. We know what the federal government handed out in the way of awards. So let's look at some of these states. And so then again, the simple math here, even though I guess as an engineer, and you are too, aren't you, Scott? Likewise an engineer?
I'm not an engineer. I work for the banking industry.
You know, you're thinking we were going to have Heather join us today. Heather is an engineer who's a math mentor on Common Core. I think she may step in with this on a future show. She couldn't make it today, but you're right. We were going to have another engineer in the.
But you know, Henry, when I think about whether an engineer or a banker or a homeowner, right? When I think about the $16 billion and then the $5 billion, that leaves $12 billion. And as a citizen in Ankeny or a school district, I'm not opposed to investment. But when I make an investment in my house, so let's just use an analogy of if I decide to do something for an efficiency reason, right? Put in, extra insulation in the attic. I usually look at what the cost is, and then I look about what I'm going to get out of it. So before I spend $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, I look at what is the payback of that going to get me, and then I make my decision. So in this case, if Common Core could show me, right, the $16 billion cost, the $5 billion that we're going to kick into it, and then here's the $12 billion. Here's the $12 billion cost that you're going to pay, but here's the long-term what you're going to get back from it. Then I might have a different view. But right now, I have yet to have anybody really tell me what's the $12 billion benefit of doing that. So again, if I put extra insulation in my house, I know the benefit is it's going to come back in my reduced heating bills. But when I try to dig around for information, and I'm new to this game, so I'm just digging into it, but I can't find a $12 billion benefit of this assessment's going to make my kid smarter, or this assessment is going to do X, or this implementation is going to gain what. And my questions go back to, at a local parent school district level, right, what is the benefit that we're going to see? Because my feeling is that the tax burden of this extra cost is going to get pushed down to me, but nobody can tell me what the benefit will be. Change is change, but change just for the sake of change doesn't help me.
That's exactly right, and I like your analysis. It's really good because it's an investment, and if the investment paid a really good return, then we would say, oh, okay, that was a good decision. If I might, I think I'll kind of stay for a few minutes at the state level, and then pretty soon, Scott, we'll look at Iowa. We'll look at maybe Ankeny, Des Moines, some of the school districts there. But if we look at the state level, we think, okay, what's the situation with some of those states? For example, the state of California, the total Common Core implementation cost will be, in round numbers, $2.2 billion. And by the way, all of these numbers in my reports are 3 decimal places of 1 million. So that's the nearest $1,000. That's actually fairly close as things go. So California was actually $2,188.494 million. So let's call it $2.2 billion. They received, I have to say only, like it was not big money, but $104 million. When you make the simple subtraction, that leaves the California taxpayers holding a bag of, they'll have to come up with $2.1 billion in revenue somehow, and it's going to have to come by way of taxes.
And California has so much extra money right now.
Yeah, I've heard that. I think aren't they one of the most healthy states in the country in terms of
debt? Of debt on the table, yes.
Yeah, that's right. They're really in sad shape. So, California voters, taxpayers, they will be out $2.1 billion. If we look at some of the other states, I mean, some of these numbers are they're just absolutely, they'll scare the daylights out of you.
Well, I have curiosity because I just saw the Fox report that Tennessee, and Tennessee, I think, was awarded money as well.
Right.
And they just went to a city council asking for money to help buy laptops.
Yeah, that's interesting. Let's look at that for a minute. First of all, they actually came out a winner. They came out ahead. There are only 6 states that received more money from the federal government than they will have to spend. So Tennessee is kind of in a unique situation. Tennessee's cost, $373 million. Their federal awards total, $518 million. When I make the subtraction, I show a gain of $145 million. So they actually come out ahead. Now, isn't that interesting that Tennessee received $518 million, and yet you've got local school districts, other folks around the state, having to float a bond issue just to pay for
implementation. That makes no sense.
You know, 5.2 million. That city council is debating a 5.2 million bond issue to buy those kids iPads and laptops. And the one city council member, apparently the only one with some common sense, said, I don't think that we should buy a car for every student in driver's ed. And I think this is very similar. And that was Smotherman, who is on the city council. So
where did they claim the 145 million went? The excess.
That's interesting, Scott. Because, in my, let's call it email conversations, I have a few verbal conversations with different states, but the bulk of it is through email. And it's interesting, from a lot of different states, I've got people indicating to me, man, I can't figure out where that money went. We never saw it. So somehow, some way, this money didn't quite make its way down from the state level down to the local school districts where it really counts. That's where the rubber meets the road, isn't it?
Well, Henry, I'm into these numbers, and I'm not a numbers person, and I just realized the numbers on the clock. We have to go to a break. So if you'll stay with us, we'll be right back after this break so our sponsors can make this all possible for us. And we want to thank the folks here at Webcast Live, webcast1live.com, for making this possible. That's how you're listening in or watching in. And we'll be right back. Stay tuned.
I'm Brian Leach, owner and general manager of Service Legends. I brought along a couple of the home comfort heroes.
Hi, I'm Tammy Wells.
I am Nick Wondershad.
I'm administrative manager.
I am the senior technician
from Service Legends.
It seems like every good thing, when you feel it to the bone that it's good, there's a lot of hard work put behind it. I don't think that you can fake it and have it turn out good.
You know, if we seem like, okay, that's just weird, it's just a furnace, why would you believe so deeply in a furnace? It's not just that, you know, we want to show the world that you can have good service.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be, it's your home.
You know, it's built into our daily trainings, it's built into our culture, that we're gonna do whatever it takes to have each client say they love us, period.
That's why we spend all the hours in the training that we do. And if we guarantee it's gonna be a good experience for you, or else it's free, what type of work do you think we're gonna do?
There is a guarantee.
Temperature selection guarantee, fixed right or it's free guarantee, comfort guarantee, best value guarantee. All of these guarantees hold us accountable to ensuring that we exceed your expectations. And if for whatever reason we'd fail and we can't make it right, we guarantee all of those guarantees with a 100% money back guarantee.
I mean, if you don't think that your technician can fix it right, are you gonna say that to a client? No.
You don't have to worry about having a technician come to your house.
We drug test, background check all of our team members. We put safe people in your home. Each and every one of our service techs, 400 hours a year in training.
You tell it the minute they walk in the door. They know what they're doing, they've done their homework, and they actually truly care about what you want.
Because at the end of the day, you're the person that makes sure I have a job.
They're gonna be listening. They're gonna wanna know what your challenges are. Then they're gonna come and give you options, and you get to choose.
If I'm there to help and I make it easy and painless, I did my job right that day.
Well, when it comes to your comfort, safety, and your family, you know, you don't necessarily go buy the most expensive, but you get the most bang for your buck.
Oh, it's worth it, because there's a lot of people that will find a way to get it to work right now and then leave and then come back, charge you again, and the cycle just repeats itself. So when I'm out there looking at the furnace, I want to find why it failed today. How can we change the part today with something that you're not going to have to worry about? Is it worth changing the part today? I mean, you can put a lot of money into a furnace. I can fix parts all day. There's good job security in that for me, but is it the right thing for you?
I get a lot of the phone calls of after the technicians are there. They're just in awe. They're like, wow, you guys are great. I mean, I don't even know what to say. You guys are great. Everything you did was perfect. It was great.
Keep going though, I like this.
Just give us a try. I'm gonna take all the risk.
I've got the time to make this right. I've got the support to make it right.
Just check us out.
And if you don't see the value in what we do,
I mean, fixed right or it's free or 100% money back.
enough said.
And I am Tamara Scott. Thanks for joining us. We have Henry Burke on the line. Henry is a civil engineer. Thankful for that person who gets the numbers. I just saw a really clever quote from was it C.S. Lewis, talking about we're thankful that those who design bridges don't think numbers are relative. You know, you want somebody, when it counts, you want somebody who's really going to pay attention and all this relative truth that they're feeding our kids in the public school system anymore. It's not so relative. It's actually it's accurate, and it matters. Joining me in studio is Scott Russell. Scott is an Ankeny parent who has been serving as a volunteer on some of the committees in the Ankeny School District, and he's also then been diving into this Common Core, talking with the Department of Education. And Scott, would you say information you're getting back is forthright, or is it around the corner and you have to dig? And
yeah, I would say that there's clearly an unknown from the questions I'm asking. So even when I ask specific questions, you know, you kind of get a glossed over answer because I'm not sure that everybody really knows. And the people that do know, I'm not sure that they're on the front line implementing it. A recent example is just, you know, about some literature that's in some of the Common Core standards. You know, you ask the questions and you hear, you know, there is no required standard. But you look at what the Department of Iowa is sending out, and in their recommended reading, and it's not even maybe recommended reading is the best way to say it. It's a list of literature and books and poems that are at the level that we would think somebody in the 1st through 12th grade would be able to read. But when you start questioning who picked those selections, and there's some in there that quite honestly are not appropriate to be read. I would call them pornographic, and not an R, I would say they're X-rated. And when you start asking questions, the first response that I receive back is, but keep in mind, it's still the district's choice whether to use them. But that's an appendix that's sent out by the Iowa Department of Education, and they put in the appendix, here's a selection. It has no warning on it. It has no rating on it. So unless a teacher's really familiar and has read every book in the appendix they're getting ready to select for a class, they could stumble into that. And that's how, as a parent, I came upon it. People knew that I was interested and active in this. So somebody sent me a quote out of a book, and they said, hey, I heard this is coming from Common Core. So in looking into it and getting an answer to it, I actually was able to find the Common Core appendix from the state of Iowa that has the books listed that are very, very graphic. I wouldn't even let my senior in high school read it when he said, what are you sending? I'm like, you don't even need to read this.
I actually was on the phone earlier this week with someone who works very closely with Jen Dole's office out of Louisiana when I saw the article that 4th graders in the classroom were being read very pornographic material and talking about pimps. I think that was the one where they were talking about pimps. And so I had sent that to this individual who works with the Jen Dole administration, and he quickly called me back the next morning and we discussed it. And I can tell you, and he said I could tell you, that they are looking at how to back away from Common Core in Louisiana now, as they have learned more about this. And it's state after state after state. And like I said, if you go on Facebook, you will see Facebook pages for every state in the nation, I think, against Common Core. It would surprise me if there was a state that did not have it. Some of the states didn't take it on, but I think even they have the Facebook pages against it. If you go to Stop Common Core in Iowa, I think I've got the link for the Louisiana article. I think I have the link for the Tennessee article. We were just talking with Henry Burke, a civil engineer, and Henry's talking to us about the numbers. And he just gave us the example of Tennessee. Tennessee being a state that got money, made money. One of the few states that I've heard, if not the only state I've heard, who actually was awarded money and could have made money on this deal, and still is hurting enough that they're going back to small school districts and school districts to city councils asking for money, asking for bond issues to cover what their win didn't cover. So, Henry, when you're doing these state-specific analysis, is there a state you can see? I mean, Tennessee should have been that state. Is there a state you can see who's going to be better off financially?
Well, Tennessee actually was at the very top of the list in terms of the biggest gain, the largest gain. And as I mentioned, they came out, $145 million ahead, so that's kind of a nice deal. But, Tamara, you sent this link to me last week, and as soon as I received it, I thought, wow, I need to get some more information on that. And I do appreciate your sending it. Murfreesboro, Tennessee, if I can say it, the city schools, they have in that school district 7,552 students, 7,552. Simple math again. 5,200,000, that's their bond issue, divided by 7,552 it's $688 per student. Actually, $688.56. Okay, so let's call it $688 per student.
For a laptop.
Yeah, for a laptop. Okay, that's kind of interesting. So I found another article. This one was about our buddy Jeb Bush in Florida. And, as we all know, he is pro-Common Core. And I could get off onto quite an aside on him in terms of money and that sort of thing, but I won't do that. But in that same article, they talked about Los Angeles. Okay, Los Angeles bought 45,000 iPads at $678 per iPad for a total expenditure of $30.5 million.
Wow.
And as the article pointed out, and it is correct, it's about $200 more than the standard cost of an iPad. Okay, why are they paying so much extra money? Well, our buddies at Pearson, largest textbook publisher around, for the benefit of the folks, they have loaded all this good old Common Core stuff on these iPads, and they charge $200 extra for that privilege. And so then for $678 per iPad, you've got yourself a nice little device, don't you? Well, and when you look back at Murfreesboro, Tennessee, same thing, about the same number, $688 per student. So, when we look at these Common Core costs, even the Pioneer Institute, they did not allocate one iPad per student. But when I run these numbers, it really gets kind of scary. So let's look at Iowa here just for a few minutes, and I don't want to belabor this iPad business, but for Scott, you're in Ankeny, is that correct?
That's
Correct.
Okay, so Ankeny schools, you have 9,386 students. If I multiply 9,386 by 678 per student, I get $6.4 million. How about Des Moines schools? 32,062 students times 678 per student. That's $21.7 million. That's a lot of bucks.
So Henry, can the schools acquire those iPads through anywhere, or do they have to get them through Pearson because there's extra content on them? Is that why they're going through Pearson?
Well, they take the easy way out. They don't have to buy it from Pearson. Certainly, if they have any brains, they won't. But, there's a lot of money to be made in this whole Common Core deal. The reason I focus on money so much is because money drove these states into it. So by my simple way of reasoning things, let's see, if money drove them into something, don't you think when they become aware of the high money requirements that they might likewise choose to opt out? At least that's the way I look at it.
That's the way I would run my family budget.
That's right. So that's why I'm focusing so much on money. I'm sorry, Tamara. Go ahead.
Well, it's just so frustrating as a parent. And honestly, most parents, we want to think the government is doing what's best for us. We want to think we can trust our school officials or whoever it is that's making these decisions. But you pointed out early on when we were just starting this conversation, Henry, that Bill Gates funded a lot of what we're dealing with. It was not government entities. It was not state-led. This was through the National Governors Association, and I always mess this title up, but Chief of Council State Schools. Am I saying that correctly? These entities we'd never heard of, and now there's a new one in the mix, the U.S. Delivery Institute, which I find most concerning when I do searches on them. Pearson, we were told from the get-go, was going to have a monopoly on the textbooks. Is that what we're seeing? This is what we're hearing, is that government will pick the winners, just like we see with the public-private partnerships. Government now picks the winners rather than parents picking the winning district or the district they want their kids to have in. The accountability is going to leave, first off, in your school districts.
The textbook concern was a big one that I raised with the Iowa Department of Education too. And of course, the answer was, right, we can use whatever curriculum we choose, but if at some point in time, right, if all the textbooks have been morphed into a common standard, where is Ankeny going to get our textbooks? I mean, do we literally come down to we have to write our own for our school district?
Yeah, Scott, you bring up an excellent point, and Tamara also, and that is, okay, that's one of their standard talking points. Is they say, okay, we are promulgating standards, and standards are not curriculum. Well, okay, but let's look at the way this thing will work. The assessments are being written by Achieve and some other large organizations, and they are going to plow not just the pornographic stuff that you mentioned, Scott, but they are going to plow into those assessments, the tests, all kinds of stuff on, socialism, social justice, redistribution of wealth, global warming, all kinds of nonsense will be plowed into the assessments. In order to score well on those tests, the students must use that curriculum. So the federal government is, in fact, dictating curriculum. That's just the way it works. The teachers will have to teach to the test.
Absolutely, because
and
their
every
pay,
day.
their pay and their merits are going to be, it will be based on the test scores. The
Exactly
students
right.
So they
And if-
absolutely will teach to the test.
That's exactly right. And furthermore, if their students do not do well, they will probably lose their job.
Yes.
So it's fairly serious business. And the teachers and the school districts, they won't mess around. They will, even if the books are lousy, even if they are inconsistent. And by the way, something that never gets mentioned, these standards, the Common Core standards, are copyrighted. Let's see, what does copyright mean? What it means is no one out in the school districts can change a single word without infringing on the copyright. And so even if something is wrong, it's inconsistent, it is not grade level specific, if it's inconsistent from, within the course or between different courses, whatever it is, whatever the problem is, they cannot change it. They are not allowed to because it's copyrighted material. So they have got you on the curriculum side, on the assessment side, and we are just now starting to see these ugly stories come out. Donna Garner put out this deal last week about the Buena Vista School District in Arizona, and it's exactly what you're saying, Scott, in terms of pornographic material right there in the book. And this one parent did the smart thing. She actually took a photograph of the page of the book. And so if someone, and what they do, they play games with this stuff. When they're caught, they take it down.
Mm-hmm.
They take it off the website. Well, she's got the proof on it. She's got a photograph of the page.
Yeah, I just saw that last night on the internet. You can still find it on the internet.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So, it's really, it's very evil.
So
what they're doing.
And so we just talked, if this is copywritten, and if in time, if somebody would say, we're going to change the core standard or the requirement, that book that Scott brought up may now be more influential in the test, and so kids are going to have to read it for some other reason. You've got no local control. Like you said, things are copywritten. Parents will be totally removed from this process. States will be etched out of this process. They've already been bypassed. And talk to us a little bit about that, Henry. When they went after this money, it was governors, it was school boards or state departments of education, but it was not the legislature. It was not those people we vote in and out who are accountable.
You're exactly right. And, if I can generalize, and it pretty much applies to almost every state, the State Board of Education, the State Department of Education, they are the ones who adopted Common Core standards. The legislature, in most cases, not every case, in most states, the legislature was left out of the picture. So now these legislatures, they're being bombarded by the folks, by the citizens of their states, and they're saying, well, gee, we better look into this thing. And so there's starting to be some serious backlash.
So it seemed to me, Henry, what I was hearing was it's almost like the Iowa Department of Education has to follow what the legislation does, not that they have a say in necessarily it all coming, that this needs to be stopped at the legislative level. But what you're saying is the legislature didn't get it here, the state education boards did, and now they say they can only do what the legislation allows them to do? That just seems That's confusing to me.
Well, it is kind of a confusing picture, and I think the legislatures are starting to flex some muscle, and they're saying, hey, we need to take a second look at this thing.
We see that in Iowa happening now.
Right. And
Only
Iowa,
because of citizen outcry. You're absolutely right, Henry. It's only because of citizen outcry.
Right.
Mm-hmm. You know, for Iowa, if we look at that situation just for a moment, Iowa had a cost, and if I make that subtraction, the cost minus the awards, the cost for Iowa was $192.5 million. Iowa received $9 million in awards. There again, simple subtraction. Iowa will need to fork over roughly $184 million more than they received. So they've got to come up with that money somehow. Iowa.
Scary.
Yeah, it really is scary.
I wish I would have had a state legislator in the room today, not to put them on the spot, but we just had a very large education bill go through this last session, quite expensive. And honestly, it would have been much less expensive to come up with education savings accounts so parents could have just simply picked the education they wanted for their children, which is the way it should be anyway. Education is a parental issue. It's a constitutional liberty. Your address may decide what time your mail is delivered or when your garbage is picked up, but it shouldn't determine where your kids go to school. And frankly, if we continue down this path, it's going to be an issue. Folks in New York are losing property value because of Common Core. They've moved into their districts because of certain schools, and they pay a school tax that is phenomenal, double-digit school tax on top of their property tax. And because of Common Core, that will be in vain. So if people are going to lose property values, at the same time, Henry, we're likely going to be taxed more with these bond issues as more comes down the pike. We've got to take a break. We'll be right back. I am Tamara Scott. This is Tamara Scott Live. Henry Burke is my guest. Scott Russell is in studio. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after these messages.
If you choose to obey the power of sin, it leads to death. If you choose to obey obedience, it leads to righteousness.
Forgiveness is just the beginning of life in Christ. God wants us to live for Him now.
And because of Jesus Christ, the gospel was preached, and you and I are blessed today because of Abraham. Did you know that? We're blessed.
Experience Truth, 99.3 FM.
Get away from us, you mean old credit card. We don't have any more money. We're in trouble now. Save us! Help! Somebody save us! Somebody help! Help! Save us!
Hi, I'm Tom Coates from Consumer Credit of Des Moines. If your credit card's a little too animated, give us a call.
Hooray! We're saved! Consumer Credit! You're our hero!
And thanks for staying with us. I am Tamara Scott. We're talking about Common Core. Common Core is, if I could just say, a federal takeover of the education system. And not to be an alarmist, but you will lose control of what happens in the classroom and how things are done in your school district. And we've already lost control of the cost, is what we're talking about today. Joining me in studio is Scott Russell, and on the phone is Henry Burke. If you'd like to talk with Henry, you may dial in and ask him a question. 855-244-0077, 855-244-0077. We'd love to hear from you. But Henry, back to the cost part of this. Is there any state out there, Tennessee you said got the largest gain, and yet they're going back to their taxpayers and the city councils and asking for bond issues. So money, there's no, I can't think of a situation any state's going to come out a winner on this financially.
Well, that's right. You know, on paper, it looks like they are coming out a winner. For example, you know, if I'm using, of course, the Pioneer numbers all the way through. So Tennessee, as I mentioned several times, they will show a $145 million gain. Maryland comes out just barely ahead on this deal, $7 million. Hawaii, about the same amount, $7 million. District of Columbia, as I mentioned before, $76 million gain. And then Delaware, $70 million. And so, we have those 6 states that showed a gain. Everyone else will have a huge loss. And I would submit, we've been talking about Tennessee. I would submit Tennessee as well as other states. By the time the final ledger is drawn, and Scott, you're a banker, I think they will show that it cost them more than they received. And, Tamara, right before break, you mentioned the state of New York. Yvonne Gasparino, I noticed that you had her on your program last week.
I did. She just dropped in for a moment to share the event that they were having last weekend.
Right. Well, I've corresponded with her quite a few months ago. I sent her the information for the state of New York. I cranked out a report for that state, and she was, I think, pleased to receive it. And, it said it would give her ammunition. And by the way, what I did, not to get all involved in the personal stuff here, but after I cranked out the report for the whole country with each of these states, then I went back on a case-by-case basis and generated what I call state-specific reports. I started with one state, then it was 4 states, then 10, then 12, and just kept adding to it. And finally, by a month or so ago, I decided, let's go ahead and just get the whole thing done. So I got all 46 states completed. There are 5 states that did not adopt the Common Core standards. And so I decided, okay, I've got those states covered with a separate report. Non-Common Core states will save millions of dollars is the name of the report. The 5 states that did not adopt are Alaska, Minnesota, Nebraska, Texas, and Virginia. And so everyone else has jumped on this crazy Common Core bandwagon. And so now I got a state-specific report for every single state. So if someone writes in, and for example, just this morning, Tamara, as a direct result of your program, I got, I think it's about 10 requests today for state-specific reports. And so because the report's already written, it's just a matter of a couple clicks and type a few words, and I can send a report out to, for example, I sent one to Michigan, to New Mexico, Tennessee this morning, Alabama, Colorado, Nebraska, a little report there, Alabama, Texas, and California. So, and that was just this morning.
That's great. So I'm pleased to hear that, Henry. So thank you very much, because people are in with this show and either on our mailing list or getting information from us. You got requests. For those who are listening, do you want to give your email address in case someone would like to email you with some questions?
Yes, certainly. It's my name is Henry W. Burke, and so the email address kind of goes along with that. It's hwburke, B-U-R-K-E, at Cox, COX.net. So hwburke@cox.net. And if they'll send the request in, it's kind of funny. I get a request from someone, and so I will politely write back, well, you didn't tell me which state. So I kind of need to know which state you're looking for.
Henry, have you been requested by any of the legislators or any of the governors, not the Association of Governors, which are really not governors, but have you been asked or given this information? And I asked because Tamara sent a thing to me the other day that talked about the North Carolina assistant governor that was looking to get all this data, and some of the answers you have, he tried to get and is still trying to dig out from underneath that.
We played that clip at the beginning of the show. We got 12 boxes, 40,000 sheets of paper. Yeah, in fact, and Henry, you actually, it was the legislators here in Iowa who are listening to the people who are concerned about our education system and are wanting information. The reports you sent for Iowa were for a great number of legislators here in our
state. So they've already got that. That was one of my questions. Do they already have it, or do I need to help get it, right?
No,
so,
they've got it.
Thank you.
I think, Scott, it's always good to provide the information to them. See, what I often do, there's a limit on how much information I can take the time to look up. For example, with quite a few states, Iowa included, I think maybe I sent it, I can pull it out here in a second, but I might have sent it to about 6 of your state legislators, and then I sent it to your state board of education, that sort of thing. I don't send it to every single legislator, and quite frankly, I think the information, if it comes from one of their constituents, see, I don't tell these folks where I'm from. I don't think that I've actually gotten correspondence from a state, like a state DOE, and they ask, well, where do I live? They don't recall seeing me at any meetings. and maybe, and this was I've gotten that same kind of reasoning from various people, and like one state was up in the Northeast. Well, I don't believe I did make it to those meetings. It's quite a ways from where I live to where they are. But still, what I tell them is, just because I do not live in your state doesn't mean that you cannot use the information.
Well, by that standard, Henry, it was our Department of Education that sent out a letter just in the last month inviting key legislators, not very many, key legislators, none of them that were in the room with me got invited. And they also invited stakeholder groups, and no parent that I know got invited. We're apparently not stakeholders in this. That was a letter that mentioned the U.S. Education Delivery Institute, which I've got yet some concerns with. And the chief of council schools and state officers were going to be there for that meeting. So by what you're saying, we shouldn't be listening to these folks who aren't from our state. Isn't that the whole issue with this whole program, is that it's not local control? It's coming out of not even the Governor's Association, but two groups that were propped up to look.
So we should just agree with them.
We should absolutely.
Since Common Core is not from locally, let's agree with them and let's don't listen to it.
On that alone. I just want to say, Henry, for those people who want information from you, the return was quick. His immediate response was very nice. And I also want to say to our listeners out there, to our viewers, you hold the key. Don't wait for the experts to fix it. They've made a fine mess. This is why we're in this boat. You have to, when God prompts your heart, when something comes amiss, when you feel in your gut something's not right, trust your gut. Don't think I don't have the experience or I don't have the degree. Put that aside and go and find out information. Start digging. Chances are somebody else doesn't know either. The legislators, bless their hearts, they're busy. They get 700 bills a session, at least in this state, and that's just a round number. To know everything they possibly need to know is impossible. They need people like you who will dig into it, who can find out the information, and nobody should care more than you as a parent. And I can't make this any more straightforward to you. I'm not trying to be an alarmist, but thank heavens we had one named Paul Revere several years ago, and we were all thankful for it afterwards. So let me just tell you, this is the clarion call. This is the writer telling you, you need to saddle up. You need to take this on as parents, uniquely designed to raise the children God gave you. You may not feel equipped to educate them. That's just flat out wrong teaching from the world, that you have to jump through their hoops, you have to have their degrees, or you have to have their okay or permission. God uniquely designed you for the children he gave you, and no one can better raise them than you, if you will. So I ask you, take interest in this. Don't leave it to others. Start talking to your neighbors, your friends over the backyard fence, your church friends across the pew, your coworkers over the water cooler. Start talking about this, because that's how you build a fire. That's how you get the discussion out. And that's now why we have legislators in Iowa now asking themselves for information. Scott, you've gotten several closed doors. I'm sure you've had to dig further for information. Don't take no. This is your country. It is we the people. We the people. Not they the government. Not the experts. We don't have an oligarchy yet. We're close. But I'm asking you, from a mama's heart, for our next generation, take the stand and start digging. When I look back at that photo of Iwo Jima, it's such a nostalgic photo. It raises such patriotic feelings for us. And then we look back to the flag on 9/11, again, emotional for us. And what I see in the difference there was a letdown. Those men, the most wonderful generation on the face of the earth that saved our country, that saved the world, frankly, from ruthless dictators, then came back to our country. And we were so busy celebrating and rejoicing in all of the prosperity that God allowed us to enjoy that we slipped up. And they came on our shores. And that second flag photo is what happened when we let go. We let somebody else watch. We trusted somebody else. And so now, even this Wednesday, in your public schools, is the Meet at the Pole Day. Controversial. Can we even pray at the schools? And we know our founding fathers were so so strong. The old Deluder Satan Act was one of the first educational acts ever to make sure children could read so they would not be tripped up. They would know the scriptures and not be tripped up by the old Deluder Satan. So this may be a little too religious for some of you, but I'm telling you, since we took that Bible out of the school, we have paid dearly ever since. And that's exactly what this curriculum is, this core curriculum. They're trying desperately to refill what's missing, and they will not do it. And it's going to cost us more. It's going to cost us dearly. Henry, I apologize. I just took up your last 5 minutes with that, but I feel like I need to tell the listeners, the viewers out there, if you don't know how to do it, make contact with me, either Facebook, Tamara Scott, Truth for Our Time, or Stop Common Core. Pioneer Institute is another one. Henry Burke has given you his email, hwburke.net. hwburke@cox.net. In Iowa, we have a strong group. Get on Facebook and do a search for Stop Common Core in your state, and you'll be surprised at what you see. We are out of time. Scott Russell, thank you for joining me today. Henry Burke, will you come back?
I'll be glad to.
Thank you so much for joining us. If you've got questions, we will help you find the answers, and you need to be digging to find those. I am Tamara Scott. Be encouraged, but never be complacent.